Thank you, Simon. And Mr. Liveris is my father, as you know. So I'm Andrew, and I really appreciate that kind introduction. I'm going to hop right into it. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you for taking time out of your busy days and listen to some of the views that we at Dow and I have been forming over these last many years. That was also part of the introduction. The first one, the one I'd like to start with is, and it may seem quite strange here in the heart of Australia's, dare I say it, most famous, most visited, most global city, sorry to the Melbourneites, to consider whether the forces of globalization are now in retreat. I can't imagine a better place in the world, actually, to have this discussion and watch it unfold than right here. As you walk through the CBD out there, as I've done today, it's very clear to me that globalization does not retreat. Not really. You can't stop it, not for an instant, not ever. But in the digitized world we're all living in, which I'll spend a bit of time talking about, companies large and small are going to continue to do things at increasingly fast rates to source materials, recruit talent, basically harness innovations from wherever they come in our ever smaller world. And they're going to be continually drawn to cities like this one, crossroads of different cultures, hubs of global commerce, really the center of where localization hits globalization. I don't believe globalization is in retreat, but what is in retreat is the belief that globalization is inevitably a force for good. Historically, global trade and commerce have fueled amazing and tremendous progress, bringing, of course, investment to this country's shores, allowing us all to take advantage of global markets from a very faraway continent, affording Aussies like me, if you like, an opportunity to be an export and to build careers in institutions and businesses around the world. But what we are seeing today, from Sydney to Shanghai to Silicon Valley, is a kind of a recalibration, and it's actually occurring on a fairly massive scale. A moment of pause, if you like, a moment of reckoning as we contend with the disparate impacts that globalization has had on different countries, different sectors, and different constituencies. And for some, these rapidly changing realities have actually brightened their outlook. Digitization, as I referenced earlier, for instance, is not merely reshaping the ways in which we communicate and conduct commerce with each other. It is truly revolutionizing entire industries, empowering analysts with real-time data about every aspect of a business, filling factories with machines that learn and communicate, putting powerful tools in the palms of our hands. For others, though, too many others, for people left behind by these technologies, that move that we're all doing, as we're fond to say at Dow, at the speed of live, this progress casts a shadow of dissatisfaction. It seeds discontent with leaders and governments. It seeds discontent in some places with actually the model of capitalism itself. We see this in this wave of populism that is sweeping Western Europe and the United States. And world leaders are increasingly being compelled more than ever before to listen to the people for whom globalization has brought pain, not prosperity. We see it in a growing opposition to a paradigm where the rich keep getting richer and the middle class tunnels down into poverty, where people find themselves somehow unable to afford a basic standard of living and worrying that their kids will not have what they had. And we see it in discussions like this one that play out in the centers of commerce around the world. Thoughtful leaders are coming to grips with the fact that if the pieces of the economic pie are not well distributed, that market-based economies around the world that have adopted capitalism at the very center of their model have not done their job. It is only at the margins that this discontent becomes a full-throated repudiation of the capitalist system itself. But that is all the more reason for those of us who believe strongly in that system, and I count myself among those, leaders like you and me, who understand that capitalism has been and will continue to be a singular force for human progress, to step forward, to be part of the debate and shape this new paradigm. This means evolving the capitalist system in much the same way that we in private enterprise and we at Dow, for example, have evolved our own business model. Capitalism, after all, is society's business model. And that is why we must all work together to forge a more open and inclusive capitalism. Inclusive capitalism. A system that thrives on multi-stakeholder involvement, not single stakeholder involvement, and one that benefits everyone in the ecosystem that capitalism affects. And I pause on all those words because I'm not sure, and certainly after a few days in Australia, I see it as part of your narrative, and it needs to become one. And different countries, as I bounce around the planet, are of course grappling with this challenge in many different ways. They're taking various paths towards that same destination, towards better balance and a more inclusive environment, towards sustainable growth of that economic pie in the face of this volatility brought by the disruption by technology. In China, where I was just last week, for example, capitalism, of course, used to be a dirty word there. And government, when it began to embrace the capitalist system in the late 70s with Deng Xiaoping and others, have allowed reforms to benefit them enormously from being an export-led, globalizing country. But today, as you may have noticed with Premier Li's visit here, a new reform agenda is opened up in China. One where the Chinese leadership, even themselves, are not taking this model for granted. Rather, they're beginning to prioritize inclusivism, social norms, urbanization that's sustainable, energy efficiency, environmental protection, and yes, indeed, even private consumption. Their recently announced 13th five-year plan has as its features words like One Belt, One Road, an initiative that shares infrastructure with their Western neighbors and in fact rebuilds the old Silk Road of prosperity for the force of what they call economic globalization, where everyone can benefit from China's presence. And another initiative near and dear to my heart, their so-called Blue Skies, Green Mountains, Fresh Waters initiative. Those of you who've been to China of late, especially in the urban centers, know how desperate they are for a change in their lifestyle and living standards. This initiative embraces sustainability, environment, health, and safety reforms, changing the very paradigm of their humanity's impact on their environment. And they're working strenuously to slow down enough to enable a middle class to catch up. This growing middle class, over 400 million new people in the middle class in the last decade alone, they need to have them be part of this fairer economic distribution system. And they also know that what it really does mean, and specifically as it relates to the USA that is appearing before our very eyes, they are rolling out the red carpet and taking away the red tape of doing business as foreign enterprises on their shores. The more access we all have to these Chinese markets, the more we can contribute to their model of sustainable humanity in their country, the more we will contribute, of course, to job creation and prosperity in China, but also to those people who do business with that country. Consider another country, just to be contrarian, but also to make the same point. It's not just this incredible Chinese propensity to plan. Look at the previously opaque society of Saudi Arabia. The government there is reforming before our very eyes. They are reforming so that they can begin to reskill their workforce, to invest in that youth that previously was underemployed and, yes, indeed, fermented the very grounds from which terrorism was born, to put them to work, to put their talented young women and men into worthwhile professions, to give them diversity of occupation and profession and add value to their natural resource, notably oil and gas, so that they can actually create a diverse and inclusive economy. If that sounds familiar to some country, let me get to that later. It provides a foundation for their future growth and employment for their society and reduce their dependency on oil and gas. And of course, as they do that, they have got the leadership in place for the new generation, the young prince, the Deputy Crown Prince in his early 30s, who's put in place Vision 2030, not as a symbol on a piece of paper, but because he's going to be there when 2030 comes. And he's going to have the accountability to put these reforms in place. An inclusive society, one where the Wahhabis allow reform to occur to enable women to participate in their workforce. And of course, the baby steps like driving and being part of the joint ventures they create with companies like ours. And now let me lead to the United States, a country near and dear to my heart, very much a part of my life, where I have been privileged to work with successive governments. And people have often said, how did you do that, to go from the Obama world to the Trump world? Well, it's because we talk about something at Dow, and I have been talking about it for some years, that is essential to any government. The realization that if you don't invest in the disruption before your very eyes, the disruption of technology, and in this case, the manufacturing sector's embrace of it, that a breakdown will occur. A breakdown will occur at the intersections of business, government, and civil society. But you cannot let that occur if you're an enterprise like Dow. You have to work with the government in place to help them win as they make their part of life to civil society clear. What is that? Smarter policies, smarter supply chains, a sense of fairness, leveling the playing field, removing barriers, putting in place inclusion, enabling a growth economy, because growth indeed forgives many sins. To this end, I've been working hard with this administration in real time to shape pro-growth, pro-business policies that move the US from an economy focused solely on consumption, which has been basically the model since the Marshall Plan, since World War II, to a model that's focused on consumption and investment. Investment for job creation. Job creation not for yesterday's era and yesterday's industries, but for the new industries, the new technology-driven industries, the digitization of all of American manufacturing. To rekindle American manufacturing in this shape is not going to come at the expense of another country. It's going to boost US competitiveness and US global manufacturing supply chains like Dow's, so we can actually grow the economic pie, so that America can rekindle what it once had as it built its interstate systems and its infrastructure from another era. And if that sounds to some of the Americans in the room like Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the New Deal, it kind of feels like that. I wasn't there, but I read about it. This is an interventionist government that has realized that inclusiveness is not about definition on the left and the right of politics. It's about bringing in civil society and business to drive smarter policies, such as retraining the American workforce, America's workforce for the 21st century, apprenticeship programs. Chancellor Merkel was in the White House very recently. I was there. The whole purpose of that discussion was how to model Germany's workforce development programs in the United States. In an age where businesses are starved for properly trained employees and workers are hurting as old economy jobs have disappeared, this is one of the most important pieces of work we're doing in the new Trump administration. Skilling our children, but reskilling our displaced workers so they can be re-employed in this new economy. It should be a key focus, I believe, here in Australia. I think we need to make vocational training noble again. I don't think everyone should have to go to university like you and I did. The 4-year degree as a must-have defies the new economy. We have to rebalance what we want our workers to do and how they can participate in this economic growth engine. The second thing we're doing in this new administration, directly involved, and as recent as last night's executive order, streamlining regulations. removing the barriers to growth. Yes, you can do it, keeping people and the environment safe by bringing science into the regulatory environment. Smart regulations should not be an oxymoron. We must make sure that regulations are simple, science-based, uncluttered, and harmonized so that the better standard always lives on. The burdens on industry in the United States are overwhelming. The US manufacturing sector today pays on average $19,564 per employee to comply with onerous federal and state regulations. In all other sectors combined, that same number is just short of $10,000. Manufacturers in America have borne disproportionately the weight of excessive federal and state regulations. I'm sure that resonates here as well. Third, the beginning of rebuilding, FDR-like, America's infrastructure. Putting in place plans not dissimilar to what Australia has done. At a time when it's easy for businesses to go around the world and choose the country where they might set up at, red carpet countries, not red tape countries, we need to start to invest in places where the infrastructure works. In the United States, for those of you who've been through any of the airports, or those who've seen the roads and the bridges, you know the American infrastructure is crumbling. To stay competitive, America must rebuild. We at Dow, and many of us who are in the business of doing business in America, are pushing lawmakers to move, and the administration is working hard to put in place public-private partnerships at the federal and state level to incentivize the rebuild of America's infrastructure. Finally, American lawmakers are working hard to reform tax policy. To do that, to encourage more of an investment society, you have to rebalance not just the corporate tax, but the border tax and what happens with VAT. A controversial subject, one that I can handle in Q&A if you wish. The fact that America has one of the highest corporate tax jurisdictions in the world has to be a thing of the past. We've been part of this conversation for decades. This may be the first piece of tax reform that gets through that puts America and its people back into a lower tax jurisdiction. Finally, on the American scene, America First is not a retreat from the world. Please hear that loud and clear. It's not a retreat. Whatever you're reading out there, this is a rebuilding of America. This is a building from the ground up of the American economy, a new deal, if you like, that will transform America to this vision of being consumption and investment. I think ultimately a stronger America is good for the world. Now, the prescription that is being followed in the US, retrain, streamline, reinvest, reform, that's the prescription. 4 simple words, very focused work streams. If they, collectively working with all of business and civil society, can deliver against those 4 steps, many companies and many parts of the economy will benefit. And it will give hope to the millions who the economies that we've created in the last many decades, the global economy, has left behind. We will ensure, we in global business, that the talk of retreating from globalization will remain just that, talk. We will give way to a new sense of American optimism, a new feel of American existentialism that is about the country's future from within and therefore its role in the world. I share this with you here in Sydney for one simple reason. I think Australia can benefit from that. And I think Australia should actually benefit from the learnings of what this new government is doing in the US. The gains of globalization are deep enough and broad enough to be widely enjoyed. And this country, our country, is well positioned to share in those gains. But first, and you'd be disappointed in me if I didn't get into this, we have to pivot away once and for all from this vicious commodity cycle that defines the country over and over again. We've all seen now the results of an outdated approach. If rolling blackouts and an exodus of international investment and the predictable implosion of a failed energy policy under which one of the most energy-rich countries in the world has hemorrhaged itself in its own domestic energy sector by exporting it all. If Chicken Little and the sky falling doesn't feel like it's finally arrived, then I'm done giving this speech. After 10 years of trying, you finally have your crisis you were due. It's good news, actually, that it's in the headlines. You have generated that emergency that will finally, I think, lead to concrete action. And I've seen it. I've seen the beginning of that concrete action, and I'm encouraged by the discussions I've had while I've been here. A 7-part plan driven by government and the energy industry to bring this back under control. Some of it is not going to do much on the short term, but done right, that won't matter. You'll see the light at the end of the tunnel. There's much we can do. Let me go through a little bit of a prescription, if I may. Lift the blanket ban in Victoria and New South Wales, please. It makes no sense. Allow us to benefit from the resources, and the people who are blanketing the sustainable extraction of those resources should participate in the economic pie. Let the landowners be part of the reward. Motivates them to do a lot more than just protest on the unknown. We must encourage more exploration and development around the country so the supply side can be fixed. And so we can put our Australian companies to better use and not let them pay double the energy price of your LNG that finds its way to Japan. And the companies locally are paying double what that landed price is. We must build an open and connected gas pipeline system to finally break the monopolies and oligopolies to enable a true domestic gas marketplace like the US Henry Hub marketplace. Enable a system where anyone can use the pipelines. So the explorers and developers, the small wildcatters of Texas can find their way here and drill with the landowners and give them a cut and then use the pipelines that have been built. And yes, we must include renewable energy in a smart, strategic way which enables bridges to be built. Bridges what? Bridges from fossil fuels like coal to gas to renewables over time. That must happen to enable us to manage our emissions. It needs to be balanced. It needs to be thought through. It's an all-of-the-above energy policy where ultimately a price of carbon is the only way to put the marketplace to work. That is required. I know it's not popular at the moment, but you can't ignore the logical. New energy policy is not the other area of policy work that I've seen and experienced on this trip. A reorientation and a revolution in Australian thinking to get away from commodities means we have to innovate in our value add. Most of our natural resources go elsewhere and they are used as inputs to somebody else's innovation and high-tech products that come back here actually. When the digital economy meets the industrial economy, opportunity abounds, and Australia has a great opportunity to transform its old industrial sector to a new age, new set of technology-based industries. And like we've done the work in the United States on pillars of competitiveness, from tax reform to harmonization of regulations and infrastructure, that same work can be done here. But equally, the Growth Center initiative that I'm a advisor to gives me great hope with those 6 industries that are part of that Australia does have the companies, the technologies, the smarts to be a brawn and brains country, not just brawn. I'm honored to be a member of that committee, and we met yesterday. And I must say, from sectors like the mining equipment and technology services sector, to the medical and pharmaceutical sector, to the food and agribusiness sector, to the advanced manufacturing sector, to cybersecurity, to the nascent evolution of what is going to be a massive spend in the defense industry, bringing supply chains with it. That is all worth investing in and building a supply chain of human capability against. Imagine if Australia invested in those sectors and all the companies that are in those sectors saw government policies that were user-friendly on the 4 pillars I talked about. You'd become world beaters in innovation by scaling smart and fast here. Why? You can. That's what digitization has brought. You don't need to be next door to the market anymore to be a smart supplier of high-value goods. As they say in China in their 13th five-year plan, I want high volume, but I want high value. And Apple, stop giving me all the low-tech work. I want the smartness of that smartphone done in my country. Okay, it makes sense, doesn't it? Be high volume, be high value. You're a country of only 30 million people, or 25 million people, or 22 million people, depending on how you count. I would tell you that you've got to make choices. Not winners and losers, but pick capabilities and technologies you can win at. That brings me to my final point, and one that is especially crucial to our discussion this afternoon. We've seen this speed of live world now operate for a while. That S-curve has just begun. For those of you who understand S-curves and what it means there's no idea where that steepness of that slope is going to go, let alone the asymptote that comes at the other side of the S. We have no idea what this new technology world of ours, with artificial intelligence, the human software machine interface, this unbelievable power that humanity will have to change us to be knowledge workers, to have wisdom and insights that are available for everybody, not just a select few, and distributed knowledge so that everyone can participate in the smarter answers to everything, from smarter medicine to smarter manufacturing with the Internet of Things. I think this is a tremendous opportunity for this country to really punch above its weight, finally in an area where you can reskill our workers, change our school system, excite people to make this industry policy, Industry 4.0, the new industrial revolution, the fourth industrial revolution, the Internet of Things, smart sectors, artificial intelligence. Make it the war cry. Make it a war cry to excite the children that's coming up behind us in this next generation, and reskill the workers that were displaced by the loss of those labor-intensive industries that you no longer need. Australia does not need a race to the bottom. You're in a race to the top. Realize it and build for it. To me, capitalism can provide the solutions to all these problems. Expanding opportunity and prosperity, improving people's lives, this beautiful city, and keeping it at that high standard, whether it be here or Darwin, my hometown, original one, or Tasmania. We have a lifestyle here that many envy. So much about Australia can be rightly seen as symbolic to the benefits of globalization. A proud country, an exceptional country, a G20 country, 27 years of top of OECD growth. Country that punches above its weight. A sophisticated country, great intellect. We should lead inclusive capitalism where business, government, civil society get defined from here, and value add the technology revolution that's in front of us. I'm very proud of coming back here, and to the extent that people like you humble me with listening, I'm truly privileged. I think Australia can lead, and I hope you all have taken my message to heart. And with that, thank you very much, and I'll pass it over to Simon.